There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Hey, welcome everybody to the Your Mountain podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms. I've got Nephi Cole.
I'm here, Dave.
I know you are.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
You're here?
It's exciting.
You're in Tampa, Florida.
I know, which is really strange. I always say still here, but it's always a different place, isn't it? So I'm like still here, but really, I'm not still anywhere. I'm always someplace new. Is that deep or what?
I almost want to start this over.
You always do.
I know. Mike McGrady's not here with us
today. He's not. That's unfortunate.
This is the first time he's missed an episode. Kind of sad that he's not here. But I think we'll accomplish a lot without him. We'll learn how to work together as a team, and
without Mike's calming influence, it could be difficult.
We might. Who knows where we're going to go without his calming influence, right?
Yeah.
So, like I said, we're in Tampa, Florida. We're at the annual convention for the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And for those of you who don't know what that is an association made up of all of the state wildlife agencies from around the country. And they get together at these conferences, share information, build relationships, best practices, that sort of thing, to improve wildlife management across the country for all of you. And so while we are here, we're pretty excited. We've got a full room. We're sitting in Nephi's hotel room. That's the studio for the night. We got a full room. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves who's here. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go first. I'm Kelley Myers. I currently work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but I had the pleasure of meeting the people in this room for the most part back when I was an attorney for the state of Iowa, representing the fish and wildlife interests of the state, and then as the director of Fish and Wildlife for Iowa.
I'm Chris Tymeson, and I'm the chief attorney for the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism. I've had that job for about 19 years.
My name is Tamara McIntosh, and I'm an attorney with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, which is how I met Kelley, and through her, the other persons in this room. And I am on the Conservation and Recreation Division side of the agency, which means I work with the wildlife and fisheries and forestry and the game wardens, and as well some outdoor conservation-based grant programs that the state implements.
So I've just realized that I'm the only non-attorney here. I don't know if I should feel safe or threatened.
Little of both, probably.
Right.
Little of both.
No, it's exciting to have you guys here. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. It's really is neat with what you guys do. I think we want to talk a little bit about the breadth and depth, the importance of of your positions within your agencies. But first, I want to say that I know one of your commissioners, Brandstad from Iowa, great guy who has been threatening to. I don't know if what the right word is, but I'd like to get out there to Iowa. You guys have some interesting stuff that I'd like to ask about deer hunting and straight-walled cartridges.
Oh boy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You piqued Chris's interest.
No, I'm familiar with it. I grew up in Iowa.
Yeah.
So, it's a new change.
And then Chris, it's exciting for me to finally meet you. I've heard all these stories about this infamous elk hunter who was brave enough to go out with Dave last year and hike around the mountains with him. And so I'm sure we'll get to some of those stories later. But it's thank you for taking the time once again, all three of you. It's exciting.
Yeah, and I'd point out. So Chris and I met a long time ago. I used to be the attorney representing the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and that's how we kind of all got connected in the past, doing these similar roles in different states that have similar but very different issues, right? But an overall mission of trying to improve conservation, uphold the laws of the state, wildlife laws of the state, and improve the experience for everybody's citizens, right?
So I'm wondering if which direction you want to go first before I ask my first big question.
Ask your first question.
hunters and sportsmen's issues, these are all, important issues, and I think that I've got a story to tell. One year I was hunting mule deer in Wyoming, and I had the unfortunate occurrence while I was hunting mule deer of sitting on a hillside watching some deer trying to be selective and hearing a bunch of gunshots. And I thought to myself, let's see what's going on. I'm not going to be here staring at deer anymore because they're all running away. And so I went hiking through the timber and ran into a buck that had been wounded, and that it was missing. It looked like so I put him down. And so then I was like, okay, well, let's see whose deer this is, because it was gonna run away. Someone's gonna be chasing it. Let's go over a hilltop and found two guys there over the top of this hill, and came over the top of the hill and saw one of them next to a dead deer, and then looked around for a second, counted dudes, and counted 3 more dead bucks. Standing around those guys, sitting around within a couple 100 yards of them.
And they had how many people? 2?
2 dudes.
Yeah.
And one more. And they said, "Hey, what are you?" And I was like, yeah, it's your deer over here. And then I, when I looked and then saw that, and so it was kind of it was a bad deal. Unlucky for them, we got cell coverage in that part of Wyoming. So even though we were in an area that you had to hike into, we did get cell coverage. And I, went over the hill and called Game and Fish and said, 2 things. First of all, do I have to use my tag on this one? And I did. And so, and then second of all, told them, there's only one way in and out of this spot. So they're going to be parked here. When I came back over the top of the hill, the only parts of those deer that were gone is that there's a head gone from one of them. And so I tell this story because one of the things that me as a non-legal person, wondered about is, how do you guys deal with different states? How do you deal with wildlife infractions and violations across state lines? How do you keep from having somebody, a wildlife infraction in Wyoming? How does that affect people when they go to Iowa? How does that affect people when they go to Kansas? So I wonder if you guys want to tackle that as attorneys in your states. How do you deal with that across state issues with wildlife violations?
You mean like the Lacey Act, or are you talking about the Wildlife Violator Compact?
I think it's Wildlife Violator Compact. Is,
well, I mean, the Lacey Act is what...
And I think most of the listeners, a lot of people aren't going to understand either. And I wonder if you guys would mind tackling those and talking a little bit about that. How different states, right? Because states manage game. How do the states collaborate?
All right. So, we all collaborate together under the Wildlife Violator Compact. And it's an act that's passed in each state, the compact, and then they've joined. I think maybe 46 states are now members.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
I can't remember if that's the exact number or not.
It's close. I always say somewhere between 46 and 48, right?
Yeah, I was thinking 48 now, but...
We're really close to getting everybody.
I think close. Kansas, when we joined, we were like the 22nd, and I helped get that legislation through in 2004, 2005. But basically, it recognizes suspensions that occur for somebody's hunting privileges in another state. So those guys got citations in Wyoming, went to court, and if the judge took away their hunting privileges, then we would recognize that in our state as well.
How effective is it?
I think it can be pretty effective for folks who like to travel and hunt, for sure. Because you lose it in all 48 states, so you're going to be done. Typically, what I've seen in federal court, so the Lacey Act is used to be able to reach out and get wildlife violators. So if they commit a crime in Wyoming and then they cross state lines and get into Nebraska, for example, they've crossed that state line. The Lacey Act comes into effect, and the federal government can then prosecute that individual for the Lacey Act violation, which the underlying crime occurred in Wyoming.
And the Lacey Act, just so we're clear, Lacey Act is a federal law, right? It was passed in... It was the first
1901 or 2.
Yeah, it was the first federal conservation law.
Right.
It was the first foray into wildlife conservation that the federal government made.
What was that?
What was what?
When was that?
1901 or 1902, I think, is when it was.
And it's been amended a number of times over the years.
From a senator originally from Iowa, I believe.
That's
So
correct.
you have something good that came out of
Yeah.
Iowa.
Yeah.
Easy now. Easy.
Iowa's got
All three of
I
your
know, I'm
guests have
surrounded.
Iowa
I know.
connections.
I'm surrounded here. That was probably, and I'm kind of pinned in. That was maybe the wrong thing to
I have
say.
a really
It
good
was
friend
intentional.
who worked for Governor Branstad,
Okay.
and you know Doug Holscher.
Yes.
I love Doug. He's just a great guy. And Doug, he's in D.C. now, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's some great things in Iowa.
Yes. Yes.
Don't dead air. What?
Well,
You're
I was
stopping
just
there?
watching Dave. Dave's trying to teach people how to. He's doing microphone coaching. So
Yeah, I was just mouthing.
Yeah.
It's all new
microphone
for
coaching.
us.
I know.
So, you know, I think that's interesting from my perspective. Again, a non-attorney. I mean, those are things that people, I think, wonder about. You know, how do you manage that? And one of the reasons I asked, you know, how effective it is. So, you know, effective as a tool for dissuading somebody. How effective is the recording? So, if somebody messes up in Wyoming, how are you going to know about it? Do you know about it?
So if somebody gets a violation, the state where the suspension occurs uploads that information, and I think we do it weekly, into this compact database, and then all 50 states or all 46 states have that information, that download every week.
That's awesome. And to be truthful, I think that's a challenge, and it's exciting that you guys have managed to crack the nut with wildlife law enforcement, because there's other areas of enforcement that honestly the states don't necessarily talk together as well, and with the federal government as it sounds like you guys do with that. So it's exciting that that's being done.
You know, there's other things too. You know, I know that some states, and I'd be interested to know what yours do. Some states can do law enforcement compacts, right? They have authority under their state law to do law enforcement compacts. So if you have a violation that occurs in one state, and you know maybe you need help with the investigation,
Yes.
or you're going to make an arrest and you need help with that, or there's a transport potentially across state lines. I know that can invoke the Lacey Act, and you might have the federal government involved, but you can still have state agents involved. So there are these additional compacts to share law enforcement resources to help with these investigations as well.
Yep. Absolutely. We have all of those with our border states.
Yeah.
As just a matter of practice. And then you can always be in contact with the state. Like we had officers working in an undercover operation from Florida and Texas last year on some big cases in Iowa.
Are you allowed to say on what?
No.
So Tamara, how did you know?
Good try.
So,
I had to try.
So all of you here, you know,
That's being a good attorney, by the way.
we're speaking with 4 attorneys who are, you know, lead attorneys for wildlife agencies. How do you end up doing that? How did you end up there?
Well, so I started with Iowa DNR in 2007, and I actually was hired to do environmental pollution regulation. So I was working on contaminated sites, leaking underground storage tanks. And to be honest, I did that for about 2 years, and then Kelley went on maternity leave with her oldest son. And there was the opportunity to work on the other side of the agency, at which point she was the only attorney in our department. We have 11 attorneys in-house, and she was the only one working on the conservation and recreation side of the agency. So we needed somebody to cover her, and I elbowed everybody in the face and raised my arm. And
So you worked together in Iowa then?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we actually worked on cases together, which is a treat. After Tamara worked in this area while I was on maternity leave, we realized that the value of having a second attorney was realized by our leadership, and so she was
It wasn't
allowed
because
to. She's amazing.
Well, if she was really that good, would you need a second attorney? Sorry, that's
Yes.
2 shots.
You know the
So 2 points to that, and well, not only did leadership realize how valuable it was to actually have in-house counsel, but the staff did as well.
Right.
And once they realized what an asset legal could be, they started coming to legal more and more. And so the workload increased because they understood the tool that was now available to them that had not been
Right.
before.
Yeah, I experienced the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Only we didn't end up with a second attorney. But
We actually ended up with a third, because
Yeah.
then we
Really?
had a third who came in to help with T&E, threatened and endangered species issues.
Yes.
and those are becoming bigger issues in Iowa.
Yes, although, I mean, bigger is such a relative term. Like, we don't have
because
any
Iowa
issues.
really. I mean, it's part of the reason that you don't have issues, and maybe I don't know if you want how much more you want to go into this, but Iowa's not a public land state.
No, so we have 1% of the entire state of Iowa is held publicly by Iowa, that includes both land and waters. We are technically, I believe, 48th in the nation, but when you look at land mass via population, we are last.
Yeah, but it's the interesting correlation. It looks like a lot of your public land states, these Endangered Species Act issues really come up very strongly in those states.
In different ways. They're actually pretty big in private land states
it's pretty
too.
controversial.
Yeah, it's controversial.
Yeah,
it's just amplified in different ways.
Yeah.
Right.
In public land states where you have interfaces with a
Federal
lot of
nexus.
a lot of federal nexus. So you got this interface with NEPA and FLIPMA, NIFMA, and I just alphabet soup without going into all the details, right? So, but then in the private land states, you're obviously dealing with landowners, lots and lots of landowners,
Right.
and there's complicated relationships there, right?
Without private
right?
landowners.
70% of the country is made up of private landowners.
It's just a different kind of impact.
But to Nephi's
Right.
point, most of the issues that we would have had in Iowa would have been on the rivers, where we had heavy involvement with maybe an Army Corps of Engineers.
Right.
So there usually was some kind of federal engagement where
Yeah.
we would have these big issues.
So
It's interesting that you bring that up in Iowa, because this is one of the issues, in working. One of the ways I really got to know, Doug was because of the waters of the U.S. issue. And of course, waters of the U.S., that was something that I worked on when I worked with Dave back in the day. But the issue there is that, there was that nexus where there was the concern that I don't have no idea. Dave's trying to do something else, but there was that nexus where you had the concern is if more waters were captured under the waters of the U.S., that there would be a greater federal nexus and more involvement there. So
yeah, it's certainly an interesting issue in Iowa.
yeah,
We'll leave it at that.
So I want to pivot back to wildlife, away from waters of the U.S. I'd love to talk about it all day long. You know how much I love it, but I want to pivot back to wildlife.
I was going to tie it into wildlife, but I was having so much trouble figuring out what you were trying to mime over there. That it was just a big distraction.
You missed all my hand signals. No, but I wanted to talk about damage claims, because and just to lay the foundation, and then I'm kind of curious how your states do it, or if you do it. So Wyoming, when I say damage claim, I'm talking about damage caused by wildlife to private landowners, crops or property, livestock, property, crops. I guess that's property too, but damage caused by that, right? Mm-hmm. And we have a statute that says I'm going to generalize, but if wildlife damages that property of the landowner, the sportsman's community is going to step up, and through the department is going to pay and make that landowner whole, reimburse them for those losses. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of curious, do your states have similar laws, and how do they work? Because I know they're different around the country. Mm-hmm. Some states have them, some states don't. Some states have partial reimbursement, some states have full reimbursement. How they work, and who pays?
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Go ahead and tackle it.
So Iowa does not have that program. We have, in fact, the opposite in Iowa, at least at this point.
The landowners pay you if
the state is
wildlife damages.
Right. The state is not responsible for damage caused to your property by wildlife.
Why is that?
Just as a matter of public policy, it's determined that the public trust resource that the wildlife
Seriously, Nephi, every single episode, turn off the phone.
It's Mike.
It's tough. Mike had his chance to be here. He's not.
That's so funny.
All right.
So it's been litigated, and the Supreme Court has the Iowa Supreme Court has thankfully determined that the public trust resource of the state is held in trust for all the people, and it would undermine our minimal resources that care for that resource for posterity if we were suddenly making these payments.
Do you think it's because you have so much private land that it would become a significant financial burden?
That's absolutely you can read between the lines in the Supreme Court's decisions and infer that it's a concern about the resources that would be.
But the state does have a depredation program.
Yes,
because
I was going to say that
there was a series of cases that gave landowners the ability to, protect their livestock, for example, from wild animals. And so the courts in Iowa have actually held that this depredation program is what is now supposed to be that tool that a landowner can use, short of shooting the deer that's eating a Christmas tree,
right,
and from a Christmas tree farm, or eating the corn.
Right.
And so we have a program where if you have to qualify by having so much documented damage, and then Iowa has biologists that will go out and work with those landowners and work with blocks of landowners, so neighbors, with everything from some fencing options and some management ideas to additional tags, some of them not during the normal season, to try to deal with very location-specific populations.
And let's distinguish, the depredation program is specific to qualifying crops, traditional agricultural crops, as well as high-end, like nursery trees, which is, you cannot enroll in the depredation program unless your crops meet the definition and you've proven to have $2,000 worth of damage in a season, or I believe in 2 subsequent seasons. But that is different than, like, I had a collision with a deer on the road and my car was totaled.
Right, of course. Yeah.
Because that tort claim comes in.
Yes, all the time.
All the time.
I bet.
So how does Kansas deal with that?
We have a similar program to Iowa's, so we don't pay actual damages, but we have depredation permits. We send our biologists or our game wardens out, and they go out and meet with the landowner. But you have to understand, in a private land state, it's a social issue, because right next door you could have somebody who's wanting to capitalize on that natural resource that's on their property and therefore protect them and bring in hunters and have a hunting operation. Could be right next door to somebody who's growing soybeans and is taking a lot of damage. And so you're really managing those two people, trying to come up with a solution that is going to satisfy both of these folks. Unfortunately, that usually doesn't happen, but you're trying to alleviate the damage that the guy is taking right on that spot, or that family's taking there. So we've got other methods too to deter wildlife, Zon guns and things like that, but typical wildlife avoidance type things.
What's a Zon gun?
It's like a propane cannon that'll go off regular intervals to scare deer off of alfalfa or winter wheat.
That sounds like awesome.
So, Dave, how does Wyoming deal with that?
Yeah, so I'm going to make, I think, every attorney in here a little bit jealous, because from a lawyer's lawyer, if you like to litigate, there's an opportunity to litigate with Wyoming's damage system. And I'll just tell a story quick on how ours works. So I had a case one time. It was in northwest Wyoming, and it was somebody put in a claim alleging that they had lost a cow killed by a grizzly bear. Right? That this was the claim, and we pay for that. Grizzly bears are considered what we call trophy game in Wyoming, and if a trophy game animal kills, you can confirm that it's killed livestock, meaning you have somebody from the department come out and verify that was a kill by a grizzly bear. We'll pay you the fair market value for that cow. This particular individual thought the fair market value of this cow was $250,000.
Wow,
that was the claim.
Was it one of those state fair cows with the long hair that's kept in the refrigerated
go tell
stall?
the story. Tell us about the cow.
The golden goose cow.
It's a fancy cow, right? And he actually had some
chocolate milk.
It's good too. I actually know the attorney that litigated this against Dave. And he's a good attorney, and the guy is competitive. He's a good attorney. He's big time into hunting and firearms. And the guy was a Division I football quarterback, I think. And he's just like, he's still that guy. He's good.
He's a very good attorney. And actually, he cut me a couple breaks because I did a couple of things that maybe could have been malpractice unintentionally at the time. And he was very good to work with and very forgiving in procedural error that I made. I accidentally, for non-lawyers, it won't be a big deal, but I served a subpoena on somebody, and I failed to give him a copy of the subpoena.
Oh.
Yeah. You're like, oh no, that's like a 101 mistake, right? But anyway, back to the deal. So it was a grizzly bear kill, right? So step one was, first of all, we had to figure out, before we were going to talk about value, we needed to figure out, was this actually killed by a grizzly bear? And he had pictures of grizzly bears munching on this cow. So he had pictures of grizzly bears on it. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was killed by a bear, right? Yeah, you get it. You get where I'm going here, right?
Yeah, grizzly bears will eat anything. Doesn't matter how long it's been there.
Yeah. So we actually had folks from the department and then an expert veterinarian that went out and did a necropsy in the field, an animal autopsy, right? And so they go in and they
chased away the bears,
right? They skin what's left of the bear or of the cow back, and they find. They don't find any traditional puncture wounds that are consistent with a grizzly bear attack. They find, places where it's been fed on. Anyway, when they skin the thing out, they find no subcutaneous bruising. So they find no bruising under the skin at all. And, what does that mean? Right? For a quick biology lesson, you only bruise when your heart's beating.
Right.
So with no bruising, we know that all of the punctures and marks on this hide came post-mortem. Right. So this bear was dead when the cow was dead. Excuse me, when the bears fed on it. And then there was this pretty disgusting, like pinkish, yellowish, I don't even know how you describe it, foamy discharge out of the mouth, in kind of a nice spray pattern. And our veterinarian said, well, that's pretty consistent with pneumonia. And so we had this body of evidence that would suggest, hey, this cow probably died from pneumonia and then was fed on by bears, but it died of natural causes, which would mean that we would not compensate for that animal. But here's a little tweak to how our system works. Our system is such that, so when you appeal, first it goes to the department, they make a decision. You can appeal the department's decision to the Game and Fish Commission. You can then appeal that to an arbitration panel, which is where we were. The arbiters, there are 3. One is picked by the person making the claim. One is picked by the department. And then the 2 of them pick the third one. And they all have to come from the same county where the damage occurs. Wyoming's a rural state, so typically those arbiters are all neighbors. So it becomes difficult to win cases.
It's called getting hometown.
Yeah.
And I've been hometown before several times.
So we're a little bit concerned that we might lose this case too. But we did have the former ranch manager, whom I'd improperly subpoenaed, who was going to be able to come in and testify that this was not a $250,000 cow, that actually this cow was genetically identical. There were embryonic implants that created 2 genetically identical offspring, right? And the first one had died, had some genetic abnormalities, and it was worth like $800. And so that became the market value. So we thought, at least if we lose this case,
CSI Wyoming, everyone.
So most will be out. We actually wound up winning the case. We got, long story, but I won't go into the details, but we won the case. But anyway, that's kind of a unique opportunity that you have as an attorney in a wildlife agency.
Mike, if you're listening to this, I want you to know, I think that you should have won that case. Sure.
But so that's kind of how our damage system works, and we have this opportunity for appeal, and that's when the attorney for the agency would get involved.
How do you populate your fund? Is it a fee that's on top of the license, or is it just extracted from the license?
It comes out of license fees. It comes out of the sportsman's dollars, finance it to the tune of several $1 million a year. And we have 50% public land, so we're not dealing with damages that occur on. Well, actually, we could. Sure. Trophy game kills your livestock on public land. We're going to pay for it.
Right.
But there are no crops. No cultivation, so we're not dealing with those losses.
What if somebody had a sheep allotment or something, a grazing allotment? Would you pay for the damage then?
I don't think so. I don't think that's something we'd pay for, but don't call me out on that. It's been long enough ago, I can't remember.
I think the problem that I see with that concept is, in the case of grizzly bears, you can't hunt them. You can't really do anything to manage them because they are an endangered species.
No, they are not.
Well, they were.
As of the recording of this podcast, as of this moment in time. Now, when we broadcast this podcast, it could be a very different situation. But as of today, the case is in front of a judge, and technically we have a delisted grizzly bear population. That could very easily change any day now.
So from the time they were listed, and as the population grows, there will be human interaction and there will be damage. And that goes with any endangered species. As the population rebounds, there'll be human interaction and some
collateral damage.
Some damage, either to the species themselves or to livestock.
It's gone up a lot.
The population is in the 700s estimated, right? And so this is the problem that I would see with that is you don't have the authority to delist them as a state, and then you're paying the damage that is being caused.
For more than 40 years, they were listed species. Right? They very well could be again, depending on what happens with a court, with the court case.
Do you have certain species that you will compensate damages for? Or is it any wild animal?
No, so it's not any wild animal. It's trophy game or any game species, and then it also includes there are some others, but
not horses.
No, you mean the type? Oh, you
like
mean
if there's damage
caused
by horses.
Let's say wild ones.
Caused by
yeah.
They're not listed as one of your species.
They're not one of our species, so
they're not managed by the Game and Fish.
Right.
Yeah. So no, we wouldn't pay.
And there's not like a damage threshold that has to be crossed first. It's just any
total
damage.
dollar amount. I've been involved in cases where we paid damages of $200. I've seen cases where it's 5-figure number.
So this is
there's no. Now there is you have to have verified damage. But yeah, there's no minimum like you're talking about. We'll talk about that offline. We've settled cases.
So this kind of leads down a rabbit hole that I'm not sure if you want to go down, but I'm going to ask just in case you do want to go down it. One of the things that you guys as game and fish attorneys have had to deal with is this concept of value, right? Where you're valuing the resource, whether it be the animal versus the agricultural resource. And there was a podcast that I listened to where people were talking about the value of different animals. For example, what's the value of a wild sheep versus what's the value of a mule deer? And I was wondering, how you guys do, how do agencies, how do you deal with that when you have, something that, for example, that's a great example. I've looked at the numbers from Wyoming and the numbers of tags that come in. So for guys that buy an elk tag or a deer tag, you'll get X number of tags come in. It creates X, millions of dollars of revenue that are then spent to pay for biologists and things like that. Then you have other species, for example, sheep, where you just don't have that many tags. And so if you're looking at this in terms of like...
Oh, you're valuing it different. You're talking a different value
I
system.
thought you were talking like liquidated damages.
That's what I was thinking too.
No,
like somebody poaches a deer.
Yeah. I think I'm talking about both. How as an agency do you deal with this abstract concept of like valuation of this resource, of these different resources?
Well, so in Iowa, it's subject to the whim of the legislature. Liquidated damages, so the fine that you pay if you are convicted of poaching an animal, is in code, and that hasn't been updated in some cases decades.
Well, and do you parse it out? I mean, for example, if it's a quote unquote trophy, a large buck, do you pay more than if it's a doe? That kind of thing.
So for white-tailed deer in Iowa, yes, we use the grading scale. I'm drawing a blank.
The Boone and Crockett.
The Boone and Crockett scale, and it's based on size of the rack, and it goes up to $20,000 liquidated damages in Iowa.
Because you guys really, that's a resource that is highly valued, correct?
Yes.
In Iowa, like that big Iowa buck, that's a world class,
right? But then there's other, okay, so this actually just was changed last year, and the legislature amended the liquidated damages code. So bald eagles in Iowa, it was a $50 fine. And if you look across the union, some states assess $100,000, $200,000. You can go to jail for a couple of years.
But was it a $50 fine? Did you say 50?
Yeah, liquidated damage.
But was it a $50
$50
fine because the fines in the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act?
Right. Okay.
I mean, you're going to get prosecuted federally for killing a bald eagle, right? We want to be clear about that. It's
not just a state issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that.
So don't shoot a bald eagle.
No,
in
don't
Iowa.
shoot in Iowa.
Even though they taste good.
Right. But
Oh, Nephi.
No, we're not.
and well, so it was but it was very old code, and I mean old relatively speaking. But when the legislature realized that it was like a point of principle for them. They suddenly realized, oh, we haven't touched the liquidated damages code in a really long time, and we just want to send the message that even if we're going to allow the feds to handle the bald eagle case, we want to update the value that we place on this animal within the state.
But even in a non-legal setting, so when I was the director in Iowa, we would talk a lot with groups about the value of the herd or the value of the resource, because we were constantly balancing, Iowa is a working land state. It has agriculture, there's river traffic. And so it's not just for wildlife. And so we were always having to articulate the value of the natural resource in terms of dollars. And so many of the states participate in the different surveys that look at, how much income comes to your state because of tourism related to hunting, or the local sales tax that's generated, or property taxes around recreational properties. And so we had these really great numbers that we could take to legislators, to kind of the non-sportsmen and women groups, to help them understand the value. Even if they didn't hunt or fish or enjoy wildlife viewing themselves, they could at least understand the value in terms of real economic dollars that it brought to the state. So there are these studies too. Most of the states have them that do break down the value, and it's just part of having to be relevant to groups outside of our, fish and wildlife world when people are making decisions about where to appropriate funds.
Right.
So, same thing, similar in Kansas?
Yeah, I think, you talk about the value of deer, and for us, we have 120,000 hunters, individual, unique license buyers, permit buyers, and non-residents pay more than residents. It's kind of a general principle in most states, and that equates to what we bring in, what deer generates for the agency to hire biologists and pay game wardens and things like that. And then there's the direct economic impact. And because I draft regulations, that's also part of my job. I have to do an economic analysis. And so there's a direct economic impact, and you say there's 500 days for every deer permit that's bought. And they spend $1,600. And that study information comes from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They do a survey every 5 years. And so you take that number, that $1,650, and granted, not everybody spends that. Some people spend a lot more.
Like you in Wyoming last year?
Like I spent a lot in Wyoming last year. That's correct.
And I want to talk about that in a minute.
We'll talk about that in just a minute. And so you take that $1,650, and that's the times the number of permits that you sell, and that's the direct economic impact. And then there's a multiplier times 3, which is your collateral economic benefit. So as I sprinkle money through all these towns that I go through, or stay at a hotel, or buy groceries or food in a restaurant, all of that is in that third multiplier category. So there's a huge amount of money spent. We talk about the 10 or 12 or $14 million that it means to my agency, deer hunting in Kansas, which is better than Iowa. I'm sorry, Nephi, you were holding up Iowa as this great place, but Kansas.
So now we've
awesome.
taken like 3 shots at Iowa already.
Tell you what,
I mean, I'm partial.
Take the shots.
When I grew
We'll
up
let
in
Iowa
northwest
stand.
Iowa, there were no deer hardly at all.
Dave won't be hunting with me in Iowa when I show up.
Right.
But to Chris's point, this idea that biologists are setting, we have great science and we make our decisions based on science. But increasingly, when because Iowa has something very similar with an economic impact statement for its rulemaking activities, And so we're finding ourselves needing to have economists and social scientists who are also weighing in.
Well, I mean, you both said it, and I just to kind of try and get in a nutshell, I hope I can. For the agency, we might be looking at, Wyoming Game and Fish, Dave. Correct me if I'm wrong. We might be looking at, what's the value? What was the value of that tag to the agency? And so you multiply that out by the number of, hunters that buy that tag. Well, that's one value. But to actually understand the value, you have to look at not just the money for that tag, but really what was the value of that whole experience. And it's a lot more than just the tag. It's, and then we're just looking at the economics of it, not even talking about the larger aspect of, what's the
not even the intrinsic value of wildlife, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's many times over, the value of a deer is many times over the cost of that tag. It's many times over the amount of money that the state could have gotten from that, one tag, because it's the value to the person who didn't get the opportunity to hunt that deer. So what you took away from somebody, when that deer's gone, that's some other hunter's opportunity that you took away. It's the opportunity for, that hotel where that guy was going to stay. It's the restaurants those people were going to be in. It's the family, whatever economic value they were going to bring when they brought in. It's the tent that they didn't buy at Cabela's. All those things, play into the true value of hunting and outdoor sports to the state of Iowa. And it's much bigger than just the dollars invested in tags.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, I laid out that case. There's also the value that Tamara talked about to the state when somebody poaches a deer. And if you think about it, we have the fine and we have the trophy fine and we've got restitution in Kansas. So if you have the fine for the Class C misdemeanor up to $500, unless it's big game, then it can go up to $1,000. And then you've got a $5,000 trophy fine added on if it's a whitetail with like a 16-inch outside spread.
Can you get hit with a felony in Kansas
for
poaching?
Illegal commercialization? If you're
a repeat offender, like you're convicted of poaching multiple times, do you have an enhanced penalty?
You have mandatory minimums on the Class C underlying fine. But then we also have the Boone and Crockett scoring system, too, for restitution to the state, which can be ordered on top of that $5,000. That $5,000 fine goes to the state general fund. The restitution comes back to the department. So if you had a 200-inch deer, that's $20,000.
Yeah,
so under Boone and Crockett, that's significant.
That is significant, yeah. I want to take a humongous tangent, if you're comfortable with me doing that. I want to know about your roadkill laws. Does this sound random? I told you, it's a gigantic tangent.
Yeah.
But you know what I was thinking? Tamara, you mentioned earlier, you had mentioned roadkill, like in valuing, like that's, you don't get, it's a separate valuation, right? And it just got me thinking, like, how does your state handle salvage of roadkill?
Or do you?
How many headless deer are there in Iowa?
Yeah.
No, but that's a great question. That's a great question.
Heads pop off. Weird.
You just hit it hard enough that the head antlers
never found again. It just
pops right off and lands in the back of the truck.
Yeah.
Weird.
If it's a deer vehicle accident, we average about 9,000 to 10,000 a year in Kansas. So we issue a salvage tag, and we keep a list. Yes. If the individual doesn't want to take it, who hit it.
So you have the opportunity
to go pick
it up.
If
you hit the deer yourself, to salvage that deer personally.
Correct.
Yes.
So I've always because we don't have any laws in Wyoming about salvage. Right now, you cannot. You cannot salvage roadkill.
The same.
But you have to contact a conservation officer. Correct. It's not like you just claim it and then you contact that person. They have to come out and issue it, and you don't get to keep the trophy.
Okay, because that was going to be my follow-up question. Because
actually,
what if
in Kansas, we do.
So in Kansas, if you see a 200-inch buck on the road, people accelerate. Because I know from talking to you, I don't know that the
damage to the vehicle would be worth that.
But I know from talking to you in the past that a 200-inch deer in Kansas might be worth more than the car.
It could be worth.
And
Right.
so,
I mean, if it would,
so maybe you're driving along and
hunted.
you like this gigantic deer walks out in the road, and you're driving around in like a 1988 Camaro or something. You're like, I've had a pretty good run.
Lemon.
So as an attorney, do you subpoena the engine computer?
If it's an old car, we don't have to worry about that.
Funny.
I'm just saying. It seems like is there a
Well,
a
you also have
loophole
the-
in this law here?
You have we used to keep those antlers, but then I think that feeds into the persona that the state wants to have deer antlers, or we're trying to protect big deer, but we would give you a small deer. And so we just said as a policy, if you're going to issue a salvage tag, they get the whole deer.
See, now I think in some states they do that, but if you're the driver, you can't receive it. There's a list kept of folks that could receive salvage, but if you hit, you still have to report, and then they just call folks that are on that list to try and just dissuade folks from shooting hitting a deer that's higher value than their vehicle.
Right.
So everyone understands when you come to Wyoming, you cannot have your roadkill in the state of Wyoming. Just so we're clear, no roadkill for you, Dave.
No, but arguably in Wyoming, you could get an interstate
yourself.
game tag and tag. You could take the head and the antlers of roadkill if you go get a permit for it, right? But not the meat.
Dave thinks a lot about these things.
I do think a lot about this. It's because
These are the things we think about.
These
We
are
parse
the
out
things
these
we think
little
about.
things.
I'm like, it seems to me, with the amount of roadkill that we have in the country, that it just makes sense for every state to have some sort of salvage law, right? And so I'm sort of baffled by the fact that we don't. And so I was kind of curious to know, what you have. And I know a lot of states have them, but there's still states that don't. And
So we should really call this session Survey of Laws, because it's really not about what we do. We're asking about
it's become what goes on in
what goes on in
Yeah.
your state.
I'm asking for a legal
Survey
interpretation of what goes on in your
So,
state.
I don't want to assume the interviewee role,
No,
but
do it.
like,
Do
so
it.
We're terrible at our job.
So what does Wyoming and Kansas do? Do you guys have a food bank donation program for your
Not for roadkill.
like hush is what we call it in Iowa, which is help us
Right.
stop hunger. And are you guys seeing any political controversy over lead or chronic wasting disease in your venison donation for
Very interesting question.
food
Excuse me?
scarcity?
Yeah, that is a good question.
So in Kansas, we have a Hunters Feeding the Hungry, and
Is that run through your department or
No.
through NGOs?
it's an NGO. It's a 501c3 setup, and
Sorry,
they-
NGO being non-government organization.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they raise donations, and they pay to process meat. And I don't know that's ever been an issue. I mean, when you think back to several years ago when the controversy arose in North Dakota when somebody x-rayed some meat and there were lead fragments that they could pick up on it. I mean, that's really what started the controversy for you guys, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah, so you asked the question because it is a controversy in Iowa. Huh?
right.
So there's, relatively speaking.
Lawyers
about-
always ask the question they know
lead,
the answer to,
and
right?
then-
Isn't that what it is? That's law school 101.
Yeah, that's true.
And we've had some conversations with the Department of Public Health and other interested parties about the concern of chronic wasting disease. And obviously, we test for chronic wasting disease, but it's not a food safety test.
So I don't know how it works.
Both of these issues are controversial enough that now I'm frightened about talking about them.
Yeah. And
No.
Like it's
Edit
like
it out.
these are
Cut it.
no.
Absolutely not. Everything you say here is on the record forever and ever and ever. So I think in Wyoming we've got an organization that's starting up a program like this mainly with deer, but I think it'll work for elk as well. No issue with lead. I mean, you bring it up. I haven't heard anything with lead. CWD is a big deal. CWD is a big deal. Our game and fish department will test your deer, your elk for free, and gives you the whole procedure to send all that in through this program. There's an opportunity to try and get that meat tested first, and you don't have to. If you shoot an animal and test positive for CWD, you do not have to keep the meat.
Yep.
Because
There's no wasting.
right, you wouldn't get hit with a waste.
Yep.
And in these food bank programs, if it tests positive for CWD, I don't know how they're going to handle that.
How do they
It's just
separate
getting
it out?
started.
They had
Yeah, you're talking about we're talking about some of the interesting things that are now that this is entered is like we are now firmly in the realm of people's perception of risk, not of necessarily actual. So I mean, in these things that we're talking about, where we're talking about things that again, it's a perception issue in most of these cases. It's not a real physical like, oh no. And so that's what gets tough. I mean, you're talking about a social issue here that I'm going to write an op-ed into the paper telling you to be frightened of something and get you to be really scared of that. Well, that's what you're dealing with here.
But I think what's interesting and maybe a distinction here is that, like in Iowa's case, it's the Food Bank of Iowa. And so this is food, being made available to low-income or needy people. And the idea that they could be getting meat that isn't healthy.
Yes.
Or is contaminated with something that could hurt them, is just unacceptable. And so I think that's where we had always defaulted to, what does the CDC say? Mm-hmm. And so the CDC's message had always been, well, I mean, we can't find any linkage to human.
And you're talking CWD here.
I'm talking about CWD.
Yes. That's bigger. Yeah.
And so it will be interesting, I think, if this conversation may change as the CDC researches this more.
And CDC, Center for Disease Control.
Yeah.
And so as the CDC researches this more and comes out with more statements, I know that the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agents, AFWA, they are in meeting with the CDC now, because now this has become a public health issue, and so now there's conversations and that communication starting to happen around hunting and public health. So
yeah, and I think that one of the things that concerns me, and I'm just going to be frank on it, is that there's a community that would very much like everybody to be scared of eating wild game, and no matter what it takes. Like, if you think about from the North American the North American model of conservation perspective, what it does to that model if we convince everybody that eating game is unsafe, or a certain amount of people, or you can create a hysteria around that. I mean, that's to me, a really scary concept that it doesn't take and there are other hysterias that are going around our country right now about people like convincing you that something is much more dangerous than it is, or much scarier than it in reality is. And it's tough to deal with those because, when you tell somebody that's affected by the 1 in a million, by getting struck by lightning, you're like, hey, you know what? The chances of getting struck by lightning are virtually nothing. Well, to the guy that got struck by lightning, that's not very comforting. But if you can get everybody, if I'm making sense, if you can get everybody scared that I'm the next one that's going to be struck by lightning, it can have a major effect. And
but this is why I think it's really critical that this conversation's happening, because we have been defaulting to the CDC position. And knowing how they're coming up with that, with their position on this, I think is really vital, because like you said, there's groups who would love to see the CDC come out and say, no, don't do it. Don't eat this meat. It's not healthy. But how did they come to that opinion? And is it being scrutinized? And are we engaging in the appropriate review of how they're coming to that conclusion? And that's why I'm glad that dialogue is open, so that it's not just a statement over here and we default to it.
Yep. So, we've talked about CWD, so you opened that door. So now I'm going to ask a new question. It's
going to go, Tamara.
Yeah,
Gotta go in the next one. Gotta go in an alternate direction.
Chris just wants to talk about his elk.
Yeah, we still haven't got.
We're going to get there.
We haven't talked about. That's a good segue. CWD.
elk. I'll get you there in a second. So interestingly,
because I also want to talk. We all last year did a cut slam in Utah that I really want to revisit from our earlier episode.
So before you talk about the tiny trout in Utah, please forgive us, Utah. I want to talk with you guys about, different states have different laws in regards to wildlife, and what is wildlife and what is not wildlife. So for example, there are some states where, deer are wildlife no matter what. And they're, by statute, they are the property of the state. I'm curious what it's like in your states, and if you guys if there are captive breeding efforts for animals in your states, and because some people, some people would say, look, this is something we really need to watch because, captive animals could be a source of challenges for wild populations. So wondering what your states think about that and what the policies are in your
states. Weren't they the original vector? I mean, why not wild population. The original vector of CWD into wild populations came from domestic populations.
I don't know that you can definitively
I wouldn't
say
say
that.
domestic, but
originally discovered and identified the disease at a captive facility at Colorado State University.
Right.
That's where they first said, that's what we're going to call this. Whether we
In
want
Fort
to...
Collins. This is your
go that
fault,
far.
Fort Collins.
I mean,
Just kidding.
for example, in Kansas, the first CWD positive hit was in a captive herd. So we do have captive herds in Kansas. To get to Nephi's point, so
It's not a point. It's more a question. I just wonder how you guys are dealing with it. Again, a challenging issue. It's a reality issue. How does the policy deal with the reality?
right. So in Kansas, we have under our wildlife statutes, basically everything except for livestock is considered wildlife, and then legislatively, wildlife is defined as cows and their captive bison. You guys have wild bison in Wyoming, but
actually, wild bison in Wyoming are not wildlife. They are not they are designated as livestock
really,
in Wyoming. Yeah. That sort of interesting side note. Yet there are a couple of units for having a wild bison hunt managed by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Yet it's not a wildlife species.
Once again, let's back
lawyer
to the issue.
nerd issue,
right? No, it's just a weird nuance, right?
So
Sorry.
yeah,
We can talk more later.
We
All
don't
right,
talk
yeah.
like this.
We'll nerd out later.
So then livestock is defined as, pigs and cows, poultry, and then the exotics like ostrich and emu and domesticated cervids. And so we have probably 75 or 100 domesticated cervid facilities in Kansas, and they're managed by the Department of Agriculture, not by the Wildlife and Parks Department.
Iowa is very similar. We have captive cervids, so they're defined as farm deer under Iowa law, within the classification of livestock, and then there are wildlife and like the wild, free-ranging white-tailed deer. There are other, so farm deer. The breeding facilities for captive cervids are regulated by the Department of Agriculture in Iowa. But the Department of Natural Resources actually regulates the hunting preserves that the farm deer go to be actually hunted out.
So that's interesting, but we've spent so much time asking the questions I haven't that then I'm going to ask Dave, Wyoming.
What about it? We don't.
Tell us how.
Wyoming does not have any captive breeding of cervids, except for one property that was grandfathered in at the time the legislature passed the law that said you cannot farm raise deer, elk, so forth. So there's one place that's still allowed to raise.
It's a high fence operation.
High fence elk operation, right? That's it. So that's it. But as a matter of practice,
or are they raising them for meat?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer.
There was a market for velvet off of the antlers, and then the antlers themselves to grind those up, and then meat. But I think real money is in a shooting preserve or a hunting operation.
But for the most part, our state has gone away from high fence operations.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Deer harvested who are captive cervids, they can't be counted in any type of record books.
Depends on this. Well,
no, not in
Boone
and Crockett.
Crockett.
It won't be Boone and Crockett or Pope and Young.
Right.
Yeah.
But
So
now you're getting out of agency
that's okay.
wildlife law.
Now I'm trying to segue back into. So you guys come to Wyoming. A lot of people. That's one of the neat things people say. I'm going to Wyoming for this natural experience. You came to Wyoming hunting elk, Chris, right?
I did. I have an affinity for Wyoming.
You went with Dave though.
I had saved 12 preference points, or 11. It was my 12th year.
Now, let me set a table a little bit here. The irony of this conversation is going to be this. You spent a lot of time on this, banking for this, right?
Correct.
How much money did you spend on this hunt?
I have no idea.
Was it a little bit?
No, it was like
he
probably triple what the
he should not sit down and do the math on this.
$1,650 spent per tag.
Now the irony of this is you're with the guy who takes pleasure in having spent exactly $1.50 in his entire lifetime hunting.
Oh, he's tighter
Dave.
than bark on a tree. I know that. I've known that a long time.
So yeah, go tell your hunting story. I think it's really cool that you came out. It's a super cool story. So you guys, you drew an Area 7 elk.
I knew I was going to draw.
Whoa.
What?
We might have to edit that out. Come on, Nephi.
Everybody's trying to draw that tag. Don't worry about it,
Nephi,
Dave.
we have rules. There's a code of conduct in the hunting community.
Giving away secret spots.
You don't.
Now I'm going to tell exactly where we went next. So
This is getting worse. I don't like this story at all anymore. You're dead to me, Nephi.
it was awesome. We had a great time.
There's a unit in Wyoming. It will go unnamed.
Rhymes with 11.
Where it's a very popular unit. There are a lot of elk. It's way over objective. There are a lot of elk, and there are a lot of big elk. Several 400-inch bulls a year are taken out of this unit. And I'd been talking to Chris for a number of years as he's saving up his points and saying, where should I put in? Where should I put in? And I kept telling him, this is the place you need to go. And he's like, well, what about this unit over here? This unit
draw in the desert.
He wanted to do a desert elk hunt. And I'm like, oh, that'd be a pretty good hunt. But man, this is a great unit. It's such a good unit. You should apply in this unit. And I'm like, I'll take you. We'll go together. I'll take you. I'll apply. And so I did. And of course, I didn't draw the tag the year you did. But it's like you burned it all, like 11 years worth of applying or of buying points. You're like, this is it. This is my elk hunt. I'm not going to give your age, but that's a good chunk of your life that went into, at least of your adult life.
Almost half.
That went into into waiting for this opportunity to hunt a Wyoming elk. Right. So this, in my mind as your friend, this was a big, big deal and really wanted to figure out how to do this right. Now, you came out once early on, and I wasn't able to join you on that hunt. You came out early in the season.
I also drew a antelope tag this last year.
Right.
So I came out on an antelope hunt.
You're going to try and poke one with a bow while you're out there? Is that what happened?
I was going to try, yeah. And so then that didn't work out. So then I came back with my brother.
So now you're on trip 2. So you came out for an antelope hunt.
Yes.
And then you came back, trip 2, this is your first elk hunt.
Yes.
Your first opportunity at elk, right?
And blew a tire on the road coming in the day before the hunt. Got there where I wanted to hunt or where I wanted to camp, and there were 600 vehicles already camped in my secret spot that I had mapped out. I'm like, I can camp right there. That nobody knows
about, Dave.
I didn't tell him.
No, this wasn't in the
he
same.
Did this on his own.
Yeah, this is. And then blew a tire, hunted with my brother. I saw one fleeting elk, and had a great time. And then, but I knew I was coming back, so we packed it in after 4 days or 5 days.
And that was in mid-October.
That was mid-October for the opener.
So you did 4 or 5 days, and then you came out again in early November.
For Veterans Day. Actually, we came over Veterans Day.
Yeah. So on that one, you joined myself and a couple of friends. A couple of my friends. Actually, Mike,
another host.
Another one of the hosts that's not here. Mike. Yeah, Mike went on this too. And yeah, so we took you back into an area that I like to hunt a lot. My favorite area, my favorite spot in this particular unit that rhymes with 11, evidently. Thanks, Nephi.
You want me to give the campground we stayed in or anything?
So we set up camp, and I took you on a climb. I'm like, this is never been into this spot and not seen elk. Like I was trying to get as close to a guarantee as possible. I'm like, we're going to go into this spot, right? And it's a good climb. Good climb up into there. And this was indicative of every single march we took. We got in and cut tracks. We'd smell elk. We'd follow tracks. We followed tracks up the mountain.
Saw fresh mountain lion tracks, too, in the snow.
Saw lion tracks.
That was awesome.
Yeah, no, that was amazing, right? Saw some deer. Saw a lot of deer. But we kept cutting elk track. But we could never. And I have this philosophy. A lot of people, do things differently. Everybody has a different method for hunting elk. My philosophy is, especially when there's snow on the ground, if I cut tracks, I just follow the tracks to the hoof. Figure they've got to be somewhere, right? So we started doing that. And, they're going through country that we just didn't want to touch. So we did this for days. We never saw an elk.
Right.
I've never been up there and not seen elk. And you had to go home.
Right. I had to go back because I had to go back to work. And
I was like, that was soul crushing for me. like it may have hurt me more than it hurt you.
I heard about this at the office. Dave came to the office.
I was resigned at that point to not getting an elk.
I told Dave he should buy some binoculars after that.
So but Nephi can vouch. This was soul crushing for me to send you back without an elk.
He was pretty bummed about it.
But I was content because as much as I wanted to come back and as much time as I had spent waiting for that permit, I had given it a good shot. And I was happy with what we did, and we had a fun time.
Oh, yeah,
so I went back, and I was calm, and I was resolute that, hey, we did it. We had a fun time. I know there's a week left of the season, but that would be a 4th trip to Wyoming to hunt. And guess what happened?
Right. So I don't know, what is it, about a Wednesday?
Thursday.
I called you on a Thursday. So you went home Sunday? The Sunday before?
I drove all night. If you remember, we got back out of the mountains, and I drove all night, got home about 2 or 3 in the morning on Monday.
And then went into work.
And then Thursday night, you had called me.
So I
said, do you think you can be here Saturday morning at 3:30?
Up, and I'd been so distraught over this that I called a couple of friends of mine, game warden friends, others, and just said, hey, does anybody know any landowners that up there? Anybody of you had any leads on elk, been seeing elk anywhere? And one of them said, you know what? Let me make a couple calls. And calls a guy who says, oh, let me make a call. Says, as a matter of fact, we know there were a couple dozen bulls on this ranch, and if your buddy can be out here by Saturday morning, right, then we'll get him out there. So I get this, I give you a call, right? I'm like, and this is Thursday.
Friday, you actually called back though.
Right. So sure. On Thursday I said, hey, would you be interested if this works out? Friday I call you back and say, we're good to go, but you got to be here by 3:30 in the morning tomorrow.
And let's add it's a 10-hour drive.
And it's a 10-hour drive.
And that was at 3:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah, so you basically had to
2 hours
leave.
to pack and leave.
And you had to get kids.
Get the kids wrangled to get them out there.
So you drive through the night.
All night.
Into the teeth of a blizzard, ground blizzard, ice storm as you enter Wyoming. You show up just in time to meet the guy that's going to take you out.
I had 15 minutes. I was still lacing my boots up when I was at the front door when he showed up.
And he hauls you up, and you head up to this unit,
this place,
unit.
This unnamed unit to hunt. What happened?
So the guy who took me out was a veteran, and I'm a veteran, and that's how I got access to this ranch, really, is they took 4 veterans this year. So it's pretty special. Wyoming's a super patriotic place. I love that about Wyoming. I don't expect anything as a veteran. It's humbling that somebody does something for you because of that. So it was very super nice. So I spent time driving up to the ranch with this fella. We got out. We walked a couple draws. Then we saw some elk. And I would have been happy with a cow or a spike. It really doesn't matter. I mean, I'm just out hunting. So we tried to put a stalk on these, and we thought there were just a couple, 3x3 and some other bulls in there you could see, but you couldn't really tell.
It was a late season bachelor group,
yes.
Post-rut bachelor group of bulls.
It was a post-rut bachelor group. And it was 2 days before the season ended. So then we tried to find those. They had gotten up and walked around, and we made a big path. And finally, we got back on them and found them exactly in the spot where we had seen them before. And probably 3 hours later, and we came up over the top of them, and the wind was behind me, so it was kind of bad.
And it was whipping that day.
It was whipping.
I remember it was absolutely whipping that day.
And it was like a covey of quail. They just bolted off the mountain, off the side of this hill. And I just picked out a bull and I said, bam. And I shot and hit it. And then it started separating from this herd. And I thought, man, I didn't shoot the biggest bull in the herd. Because, after I took a shot, and it's a nice bull, I shot a really nice bull. I'm super happy. But it just showed me what was there. There were just some giant elk. And my bull split away and then laid down, and I stalked down and made another shot and was done. So,
and I know that scoring doesn't matter to you, but it's still it was a 330-inch bull.
It was, yeah.
No, it's
a magnificent
that's a big
bull of a
so
lifetime.
people who don't know, for you to have said that wasn't the big one.
Right.
Yeah, that's an amazing place.
It was the closest shot that I had. I looked down and it was 350 yards, and I looked down, and that's just the bull that my eyes caught and focused. I mean, I would have shot that bull anyway, just because it was a nice bull, and I was super happy with it. But then after I had made the shot, I knew I hit it, and then you look and there's 20 animals or 25 animals, and they're running away, and it's not the biggest bull.
There's a large ranch up there called the Wagon Hound, and we did a shooting competition. Their Vortex sponsored one called the Vortex Extreme. Dave's looking at all the cords; it's making me nervous. But that Vortex Extreme, the Wagon Hound hosted that. Don't worry about it, Dave. It's all running.
No, I'm looking at our battery.
Oh, we better plug that thing in. So, but yeah, they. That ranch controls a lot of private land up there, and it's just it's an absolute mecca for big elk.
Just really quick, I want to go back and finish this because
I was just
no, you're right, but now you're starting to give away more specific locations.
Right.
No, so if you want to go hunt that area, call the Wagon Hound, because that's not the same place Dave's going to go hunt anyway.
No, but I thought I made myself really clear earlier. Evidently, we need to have a talk after this.
This is not a general tag for the rest of you.
Anyway, you sent a text message, and I was with Kelley at the time, and euphoric when you send this text message with this elk on it.
Just a picture.
Yep. And it's just this, holy smokes, it actually worked. It actually happened.
I think you danced. I think you did public dancing.
I may have. I was absolutely thrilled beyond belief, and if it may be the first time in my life I've been more excited about somebody else's successful hunt than my own. It was just this, and I know I'll feel that again as my kids get to the age they're starting to hunt, right?
I do.
Yeah. But I was absolutely euphoric. It was this.
You're like a son to Dave.
It was
right.
Because you had invested so much. And then I thought the hilarious part, just to add insult to injury over everything that you've been through, right, on this. So you finish this hunt. You actually end up having to come back to another week later,
right,
for a fifth time, right?
We made 5 trips to Wyoming
to come back and pick up your meat.
Pick up the meat. Because, I was actually going to process it right there. I mean, I had brought my big cooler out and was going to bone it out. But I was so exhausted at that point, just getting it to the processor. I was happy to do that at that point, just get it to him. And then I went to the hotel and collapsed and slept from 6 o'clock until the next morning.
I'm so thrilled. I still am thrilled I still show people and tell people that experience because it was just amazing to me.
So it was for those of you, so now I'm going to try and put a outside perspective on this. If you don't go hunt with friends, you need to take that opportunity. If you haven't taken a good buddy to go do a hunt that they haven't done, wow, it's just super fun. It is as rewarding as getting one yourself. Like when you see somebody do that for the first time, and it really does make a difference, you know. And I've done with a number of friends where you realize like you light a fire that is the future of hunting and fishing. You know, you light a fire that you are sharing a light that's going to get shared many more times and exponentially grow opportunity in the sport. And even though Dave wants to hide these special places, it's important that we all share them. It's important that we get people out to hunt in amazing places, because I know we all want them for ourselves, but the reality is, if we keep them for ourselves, we're going to lose them, because we'll lose the community, we'll lose the growth. The more popular these areas and these activities are, the more socially acceptable they are, the better it is for our whole community. And I know it's not as good for you as an individual, for any of us, as if I'm looking out for number one, yeah, but the reality is the global perspective of hunting, fishing, the shooting sports is, if we want to keep them, we have to share them.
So, Nephi, just to be clear about this secret spot, there were other hunters in the secret spot every day. So it's not so secret. It's just not overrun.
Yeah, no, it's true. And you did mention
Dave really doesn't take people to the secret spot. Every spot to Dave is a secret spot.
We didn't get an elk. I'm so sorry. We went to my secret spot.
Yeah, nobody's ever
it's
seen
not
the
the go-to that he would have gone to if he's like, I gotta get an elk today no matter what. No, it wasn't that spot.
Right.
There's well,
that's the double secret spot,
yeah.
Right?
The extra secret.
The super duper super secret. Yeah. With a cherry on top. So you talked about we're running a little low on time, or a little over time. I guess it's a podcast. It doesn't matter how long we go, right?
We could talk hunt and fish. I mean, we haven't got to your double bass.
Oh, man, that was amazing. This just happened. And
on the next podcast with Chris.
This just happened, and so I got to say it. And then I still want to talk with Tamara about, all sorts of stuff, because I know you did a really cool pack trip in Yellowstone a couple years ago, right? Mm-hmm. But I still want to talk about our collective experience with cutthroats, but we're going to have to do that kind of quickly. But I got it. Yeah, this blew my mind with the bass fishing. No, seriously. So Chris calls me up I guess it wasn't even, you didn't really call me up. It was,
we had planned to see each other 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I was going to my cousin's wedding.
So hold on.
What? Time out?
Time out.
Okay, so I actually have an idea. I want.
Is this really your idea?
Yeah. So I really, really want to talk about this bass fishing experience, because it was this is something that I've never met anybody that this has happened to, and it actually happened to me, and it was one of the coolest fishing experiences I've ever had. But I'm not going to tell it right now.
On the next episode
we'll talk about
of
it
the
next
Your
time.
Mountain podcast, giant man-eating bass.
We're going to talk
and tiny trout.
And tiny trout.
And we're going to talk. Yeah, we're going to talk
and we
trout.
have to have reference to Braden, one of your previous guests, because I believe there was some discussion that went on about me.
Oh, that's a good point. So
right.
So we're gonna have to all for coming.
So we're gonna have to do this on another podcast, and we'll just say the next. So we've had a lot
together again.
We've had a lot of we've shared a lot of information here about wildlife agencies, right? When we do this next podcast, when we're talking bass fishing, we're talking cutthroat trout fishing, we're talking bears, and we're going to be talking backpacking in Yellowstone. It's going to be storytelling time. It's going to be legit storytelling time, right? Before I sign off, really quickly, for one last thing for each of you. We ask this of all of our guests, right? You know what I'm going to ask.
I love this part.
Yeah, right? Your Mountain podcast. What's your mountain? What is the place or the thing of the outdoors that means the most to each of you?
If you ask this now, you can't ask it at the end of the next one.
Yeah, you can. You have a different.
You can
have a different mountain.
Well,
you don't.
Then I guess
are you
can
seriously
have a mountain range. Right?
Yeah,
there you go.
Right. Maybe you have two.
Maybe.
What is it?
Kelley, please.
So I have thought about this because I listened to the podcast, and it is a great question. And I've got I got a mountain range, but the best place to be is right there with your kids, helping them catch that first fish, helping them touch the worms, just helping them be outside and be successful and have fun with it.
I'm going to dial that down a little more because, I have the same concept. Kelley and I have talked about this and thought about this question. So, but mine is really, we have this little lake or pond that's north of the house. It's about a mile, and it's inside the city. We live in the city, and we take our kids there, and we fish quite a bit. And it's really taken me back to my roots with worm and bobber and how much fun fishing with your kids with a worm and bobber is. It's just really back to childhood for me. And I've seen my son and daughter catch bluegill and bass and big crappie or big catfish. And I mean, all sorts of fish just coming out of this little urban lake on worm and bobber.
That's awesome.
That is awesome.
Yeah. I think mine at this stage, I also have a mountain range, would probably be that feeling that you get when you've hiked into a remote location and the only way to access that spot is by your own body and your own will, and knowing that if I hadn't exerted that effort, I would never have seen this. And that isolation and remoteness of like, I'm actually really, really small and the world is big and beautiful and powerful and I don't actually have influence over it.
You're an elk hunter.
It's humbling and empowering and invigorating and letting go of all of the connectivity and just breathing in.
Is that type 1 or type 2 fun?
That is type 1. Sometimes the experience to that moment is type 2 fun.
We can follow up on that.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Hey, thank you all very much. So this has been amazing. Like hearing about how each of us work in different states with similar issues and the types of things that attorneys for wildlife agencies are dealing with. I think it's pretty fascinating. It's interesting stuff. I hope people have learned something and think that it's interesting. And these are really interesting people, which is why we can't let them go. And we're going to do another podcast. And we're going to dive into the really interesting part of their lives. And that's the stuff they do away from the office. Because attorneys can, believe it or not, attorneys can have fun too, right?
This is debatable. We'll see in the next episode.
We'll see in the next episode.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Mike here from the Your Mountain Podcast. We need a favor. Go on our website, itsyourmountain.com, and find the links to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram so that you can like and follow us, and also so that you can share us with your friends. Wherever you got this podcast from, go ahead and click subscribe, rate us, and leave a comment. These simple things will really help us get the word out. That's itsyourmountain.com. Thanks for the help.